I want to go a little bit more into specifics relating to the ethics, which relate, of course, are synonymous with best practices, which combine in the synergy of competency and love, to look at the violations involved, the violations of ethics involved in the dynamic with myself in relationship with the high community and with the facilitators. And so, referencing our grid, we have Dane, Peter, the community, the board, the facilitators. We could add in the law, we could add in the culture, we could add in the state of California, we could add in the public, we could add in Sarah Sandhill as a separate facilitator, but just to kind of briefly work with this diagram. The first and very important distinction is of the two sides of every acculturated personality, meaning we live in a culture that is fragmented, that is filled with breaches of these ethical paths in a variety of trauma-based betrayals. And so each individual in our culture has developed some degree of their healthy, optimal self, their native personality, and some degree of the adaptive personality that is developed, usually in childhood, to cope with dysfunctional parents, teachers, siblings that have been trained to be dysfunctional by dysfunctional parents and teachers, and in particularly the addictive personality who has the primary goal of keeping pain at tolerable levels, getting through the day. And the addictive personality is symptomatic of the underlying pain of isolation, fragmentation that stems from a lack of ethical behavior throughout the culture. And it's very important to understand that at any given point, we are being loyal. We are building relationships in one of two ways, and often both ways simultaneously at different levels. But one is showing loyalty to the optimal healthy self. This is showing loyalty to love, to the meeting of human needs, survival, security, sense of loving belonging, self-esteem, the development of one's personal gifts and potential, the migration of those gifts to bless the community, and the development of the transcendent self, the wise one, the initiated one, the visionary, the one who transcends the ego, to be interested in a larger sense of self through ecological awareness, through awareness of other people, through wanting to make a difference beyond the myopia of the ego. And these are our human needs. When we are loyal and interact with another human being in a way that facilitates that growth, we are being loving. Whether we're in lust with the person or not, whether we're in addiction with the person or not, when we are behaving in a way that is facilitating that, we are being loving to another. When we're behaving in a way that is facilitating that growth for ourselves, we are being loving to ourselves. Now, the adaptive personality, contains such things as shame, the contract of abuse, the coping mechanism. I will please and do whatever you say, regardless of its ethics, regardless of how much it harms me. I will not ever criticize you, even if you're doing something incredibly hostile and dysfunctional, because you won't like me, and I want to be liked. And I've learned in our dysfunctional contract that in order to be liked by you, I can't criticize you, even if you're doing something wrong. I have to pretend that everything you're doing is right. And this is a divided self, which means in that sense it is, an unethical self, because one part of us is undermining our well-being in order to survive in the culture, and another part is seeking to grow and become our best selves. And so the real issue is not, are we being loyal to someone? We always are being loyal to one part or the other if we are in relationship. If we're flattering, if we're lying, if we're charming, or if we're seducing in a direction that destroys the other person's development of their basic human needs, we are likely in a fear-based, abuse contract that says, I look for narcissists to please, and they give me work, or I praise everyone regardless of what I think, and then people invite me to parties, and I don't want to be left out as the wounded child, is threatened and dominated in a dysfunctional family. You don't get to say that dad's being irresponsible by gambling the money away. You don't get to say that it's sexual abuse for dad to fondle your sister's breast. You don't get to say these things because dad's going to hit you. So if you don't want to be hit by dad, you have to adapt. If you don't want mom to scream at you, you can't point out that she's lying to yet another person. And is that really the only avenue for survival in the culture? And so we have these two sides in one another. And we also have a larger context of ethical behavior and in terms of the healthy part of the self. And one of them is that truth plus integrity plus transparency plus empathy equals trustworthiness. The healthy part of ourselves trusts people that combine these characteristics. Trustworthiness combined with transparency equals trust. Trust equals efficiency. When you trust someone, you don't have to put locks. You don't have to watch your wallet at every time. You don't have to wonder, are they lying and cheating behind your back? Which means that one can invest with more empathy in the relationship and simultaneously take less energy away from defense. We all have a protector guard that is protecting against the addict and the adaptive personality in the other, that is trying desperately to appease the abuse system within themselves, within their family, within that, in order to eke out a survival, and is happy to destroy the self, destroy any sense of meaningful, to damage love and trust in any way, just to get through the day. Or the addict that will blow the family savings, that will do anything to avoid the pain for that day other than face the pain, talk about it, and seek help to resolve it. And so the more untrustworthy someone is, the less we trust them. The less we trust them, the more we have to analyze constantly who's acting behind this agenda at the moment. You say you want to be my friend. Are you really saying you want to have a quick fuck, and then when the feelings that erupt in that state that need to be held, you're not going to be there because you're having an addictive fix, but betraying the meaningful emotions that in a healthy person are induced by deep physical intimacy. Of course, when you lose trust, you lose efficiency. You lose the efficiency of being able to co-create a loving relationship that supports both people of meeting their needs. And when you lose efficiency, you lose value. If I have to be hit 2 times in order to live in this house per week, I get hit. You've got to spend a lot of energy as a child protecting from the next hit, guarding against that. You've got to start lying in order, because you're going to be violated if you tell the truth. And this is the most damaging aspects of a dysfunctional culture, is you get pain and traumatized for being healthy, which begins with truth and transparency. Without value, you lose sustainability. And so the relationship is weak and falls apart very easily. The slightest knock just falls it apart because it has no value, because you're spending so much energy to manage fears and protections against the inevitable betrayal, because you watch this person betray this person, which means they've already betrayed themselves, which means they're going to betray you next. And so there's an increase in defense. The defense budget goes up. The growth and love budget goes down. We have to choose how to allocate our resources. So with efficiency and value comes sustainability. When you're able to create lots of value very efficiently with minimal costs in defense, you create a win-win relationship. And you get love. You feel grateful. You feel safe. You feel joy being close. Your innocence is allowed to blossom in that relationship because it's held with honor, which of course begins by holding one's own innocence with honor, something that's often been decimated by the time that we reach teenage years. It's been betrayed, lied to, manipulated, humiliated so many times. It's often very difficult to hold our innocence with honor, and very easy to scoff at it and treat it with the same disdain that our abusers have treated it so consistently, to give up on innocence and focus on a life of manipulation, etc. And this is what gives rise to the adaptive, addictive, pain-managing personality. And so in this dynamic, the first time that I betrayed everyone in the group was by allowing my therapist to coerce me into an exceptionally high dose of psychedelics. And in doing so, in allowing that, I argued for 5 minutes. But part of Peter's pain management strategy is to be great, is to be amazing. And he was more attached to the idea of pushing a high dose than he was to understanding the ethics of psychedelic facilitation. And one of those is you never push someone past their optimal or comfort level. If someone says, I'm really uncomfortable and I want to have a low dose and give it a try, it's my first time, etc. I have a sensitive body, this is my sense of what's right for me. As a therapist, with the authority of that role, you never push someone past their boundary. You have just violated your client. You've erased some of the trust. You've erased the outcome, which in doing so, you violate the community, the board of directors, your wife, your fellow facilitators. And so when you betray one in the circle, you betray all because you weaken the circle. And I wanted Peter to like me. And Peter was in his addictive personality, in his pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing for more, to go beyond my boundary. When I let him, I betrayed the healthy side of Peter. and this is the problem with a psychologically illiterate culture. This was not clear in my mind. I just knew that it would make Peter happy and he would like me more if I agreed to do this thing that seemed to be so important to him. However, the whole framework of healing was violated because this was not about making Peter feel good about himself, that he'd, in the same way that the chauvinistic man, wants to fuck that woman into multiple orgasms, whether she wants to or not, because I need to look good. It's not about what you feel at all. And, the woman, okay, fine, I'll fake some great orgasms. You can feel great. But at least this isn't a professional container. This is just another chauvinistic man in a chauvinistic culture trying to feel good enough in a situation where the chauvinistic guy talk is, I made her have 3 orgasms, I did this, and so bigger is better, I did that. It's not about respecting the other human being, and this is a violation of the man, it's a violation of the woman, and it destroys relationships. You're not going to have a sustainable marriage where the guy doesn't feel adequate unless he's violated and pushed his partner into repeat experiences she doesn't enjoy. They're not about attunements to her. It's all about his ego. This creates resentment, bitterness, hate. It doesn't create love because it's not an ethical action. So Peter pushed for that, a violation of the role. I allowed it, a violation of Peter, meaning if I had known what I was doing, I'd say, and this is, of course, a little bit of the joke, because you don't go to a therapist and pay them $175 an hour on the presupposition that you know a lot more about the dynamic than they do. Peter was the one 10 years earlier who was trying to push me to do MDMA with me in his house, and I didn't, but my thought was, maybe he knew something. Maybe, he knew what he was talking about. Now, simultaneously, when I tell Peter that he really hurt me, and he crosses over that and says he's ready to be done with that, again, more of the pain management. What's being challenged there? His authentic self is being invited to grow, to learn about his impact, which is key to keeping a strong circle, which is an ethical circle, a loving circle. You've got to give honest feedback about what's going on. That's hurting. That's okay. That made me feel great. That's really helping me. This isn't helping me at all. And it's very important that someone in the role of therapist or healer has the maturity to be more interested in what's helping or hurting the client than looking good. And so when Peter brushed over that, I let him. In doing so, I betrayed myself. And it's a compounding betrayal. Of course, I wouldn't have let him if I had been in my normal personality. I don't let people get away with that shit in, a candid, because I've got an analytic filter that says, wait a minute, we're in sociopathic land here. I said you really hurt me. You didn't ask why. You didn't learn from it. You didn't apologize. You just said, I'm ready to be done with it. Well, if you tell a spouse that they really hurt you and they don't even want to talk about it, you're not with a loving spouse. You may be with an addict. You may be with someone who's terrified that the truth will come out, but you're not with a loving adult. And so that has to be dealt with. Wait a minute. A relationship cannot survive without empathy. You can't empathize by denying. This is dysfunctional behavior. But because I had accepted the high dose, I'm now in a very suggestible place. So the first violation leads to the second violation. I'm then even in a more high place when Peter announces that he has betrayed his wife. So Peter betrays the board, me, the other facilitators, and specifically his wife, when he tells me that he did not inform Sarah that this was a psychedelic session, one, because he thought it would be less complicated that way, and three, he's telling me what is a violation of his marriage. Now, how do you know it's a violation of his marriage? Well, it's a violation of truth, integrity, transparency. He's not empathizing with what it's like to be his wife. How would you like to marry and put Peter as your number one person in your entire life, induce him into high facilitation, provide him with a career, and then discover, one, that he's lying to you, and two, that he's telling his patients that he's lying to you? Now, when I let Peter get away with that, again, I'm like, wow, maybe this is how the facilitators keep their relationships together. I've always told the truth to my partners. I've never lied to a partner by omission or statement in fact, because it doesn't work. It's an unethical, dysfunctional coping mechanism. It doesn't work. Now, Peter is feeding my dysfunction. He's guiding me on, he wants to tell me his, shame-based secrets, etc. And that's the bond that he's inviting. He's not interested in the bond that's about ethics, that it's about what's good for every single person in the circle, which is for him to go to the facilitators and go to his wife and say, Dane's asked me to facilitate his first psychedelic journey. I'd like to do it. I think it would be good for Dane. And if it's good for Dane, it's good for everyone else. He's one of our clients, da-da-da-da-da. What do you all think? He has to listen to how they believe that action will affect everyone, the community, Dane, themselves, Peter. Hopefully, from a healthy part of them that is interested in everyone's well-being. And they might say, well, we should check with an attorney first. Seems like it's legal as long as you don't provide the substance. So then Peter shouldn't arrive with a bag full of mushrooms. That's instantly weakening High's relationship with the law. So there are ways around that. The sitter will say, you provide the substance, I will not be contracting to sell you drugs or anything like that. I will be contracting to hold a sacred space for you, which is legal. And I will not imbibe, which, because I want to protect the strength of this circle. And so that's the legal thing. Then the next thing is, Sarah was very unhappy 10 years before when Peter was suggesting that I take MDMA with him in his house after expressing sexual interest in me and after telling me that he was interested in a bisexual relationship and he was looking for a male that he could open the relationship with. And again, he didn't ask about how that supported me. He was telling me about his agenda, which is again a violation of high and therapeutic principles. It weakened his marriage. Sarah was very uncomfortable with it. So Peter's response to that discomfort is not to learn and respect that discomfort. It's 10 years later, he's learned not to tell his wife what's going on. And I went along with that. Now, in going along with that, admittedly in a high state, because this is where the one violation becomes the next, which becomes the next. In going along with that, I violate my relationship with Sarah. Because as a rational human being, I cannot say that if I was Sarah, I wouldn't want to know this. Now, Sarah may not want to know this because the relationship with Peter is held together in mutual addiction and lies and dysfunction. And Sarah may know that Peter would dump her in a heartbeat if she demanded his ethical self, the part of him that would put his security, his survival, his self-esteem, his love and belonging is in the community is damaged by these violations. There's no informed, healthy individual that looks at this pattern in behavior and says, yeah, that was Peter loving himself. Everyone who understands the situation says, why does Peter have so little regard for his marriage? Why does he have so little regard for himself, for his self-esteem, for therapeutic principles, for business ethics, for his career? Why is he treating himself so shittily? One, why is Dane going along with it? Why is Sarah going along with it? Why did Sarah cover up for Peter 10 years earlier? And then when the facilitators say that this is not a high issue after a direct request for help, they are destroying the trust in Dane. They're weakening Peter. They're not standing up for his ethical self. They're covering for his addictive self. They're betraying the community. They're betraying their mission, the law, and the culture. Because no one in law, no one who understands nonprofit mission statements, including a world where everyone wins, says that denying that a high facilitator sexually abusing a high participant for money recommended by other facilitators is ethical. It's not what you do to make the circle stronger. It's what you do to tear up the circle and throw it into pieces. So they're betraying. Now, I was going to them eventually as a stand for high, which is a stand for the client and the community, which is a stand for Peter. These are his friends. A friend doesn't put up with that level of self-destructive narcissistic behavior professionally, legally, morally, therapeutically. It is a disaster to coddle that behavior. Now, High refuses to apologize based on the first violation that it's not a high issue. You know it's a high issue when the law can shut you down for it, when every community member that is informed would have a healthy feeling of alarm that a high facilitator would sexually abuse a client after pushing for an overdose in violation with their marriage and their facilitators. Every single individual who knows anything about nonprofit ethics, about loyalty, about trustworthiness, about professional ethics, about healing, would be aghast. They would be aghast that it happened, and they would be even more aghast that it was covered up. Now, the cynic in us looks at a Trump or looks at this and says, well, this is just America. But we don't need a tax-free nonprofit formulated to reenact our cultural abuse protocol and call it love and charge lots of money for it. We've got it for free. We don't need that. Now, the board betrayed me and the trust in the board, which is the trust that, you see, what's the purpose of a nonprofit board? The purpose of a nonprofit board is to say, look, we know Americans. We raise dysfunctional, self-absorbed, dishonest Americans who like to look good and start nonprofits and then spend the money for personal stuff and cover up agenda. They don't actually put the public first when it comes to a conflict of interest all the time. Okay, what can we do about it? We can invent an independent board of directors. Now, what's the job of the independent board of directors? Well, their job is not to be involved in the day nitty-gritty, so that they have a more independent perspective. So that when you bring them independent evidence of gross malpractice, that hopefully, if they're a truly independent board, that's the point of an independent board. They should not be your lover and, people that you've got blackmail stuff with and all that. No, they should be someone whose focus is on the mission. Now, a loving organization picks a tough independent board who will hold the employees accountable to the mission. When the employees get stuck in their addictive coping mechanisms and are afraid of being punished and are likely to do the wrong thing. That's the job of a board of directors, to be independent and put the mission and the public first. That's the condition of getting the tax break. Well, High's board is not independent. It wasn't picked for competency or independence. It was picked for loyalty to whatever the facilitators asked. It was picked because they thought these people understand that we do some valuable things, and they're going to do whatever is needed to make sure that High can continue and cover up stories and stuff like that, because that's exactly what the board did. Every single one of the board covered this up. Not a single board member did the ethical thing and was responsible to the public, which would mean no secrecy, no lies, understanding what went on and understanding what we're going to do about it. Because you're in denial, which is a further betrayal of public trust. You are not in an ethical place when you cover the thing up out of a denial that it's even an issue. The board betrayed Peter, betrayed the facilitators, betrayed their healthy trust with myself, and most importantly, given their role, betrayed the public and the community by not coming forward. The board is corrupt. It's no different, better or worse than the corruption we see in corporations all over the country. And there are firings, and then we have new corrupt people that come on, and hopefully some different measures, etc., that come on. But what's troubling about this, what's really off, is we understand if we go to a school to learn to love, we understand we haven't learned it fully yet, 1, 2. If we go to a school to learn healthy relationship practices, we understand that we can't learn that from the culture. If we did, why would we pay thousands of dollars to go here when we could just have great ethical breakthrough relationships with our neighbors? No, we're going to a school, we're going to a leadership body, we're going to therapists because we understand that the culture is inadequate. It is emotionally illiterate. It is psychologically illiterate. It is relationally illiterate. Our culture does not raise families as a statistical norm that knows how to differentiate between the dysfunctional self and the healthy self. We don't teach this in high school. That's when you need to know it. We protect the dysfunction in the parents, which is the abuse contract. You'll tolerate us and give us some sugar, which is bad for our health, or bribe us with TV, etc., if we don't tell dad this, and if I don't tell mom this, and the child's caught in this, I won't tell this, and the child has carried all this dysfunction. And then the parents usually are not satisfied, at least my parents weren't satisfied, simply to abuse the children and violate one another. They then want to look good, of course, right? So the final thing is we'll give you more of a bribe if you call all this wonderful love and say what great parents we are, which means that the child is asked to be completely fucked up and insane in order to get the bribe of some semblance of acceptance and belonging or value. And often the only value that the child has to the parent is in the weaponry that the child is able to use from one parent to another. Both my parents used all 5 siblings as weapons in their divorce and things. So we were valuable. If we could participate, if we could hurt mom for dad or hurt dad for mom, we were only valuable to the degree that we could be used for the wounding, or we were valuable for the secret. If we wouldn't tell Mom about this crappy thing that Dad did, or if we wouldn't tell Dad this crappy thing Mom did, we would be valuable. In other words, our complete value is the degree that we will enact and play out the script of the abuse contract, in which we are narcissistically used as a weapon to destroy the marriage and destroy ourselves. And this is the exact same contract that is the default contract in abuse in larger organizations and power structures if it doesn't get examined. And how does it get examined? If you get traumatized and hit for bringing it up in the family, if your school doesn't want to know about it, your government certainly doesn't want to hear the truth, and your next dysfunctional relationship partner isn't any more clear about what went on in their family as you are, and you hook up, you reenact the pattern until it becomes conscious and until you can find the inner strength to stop colluding with abusive power structures simply because they are bigger and there's some part of you that needs them. Every child needs their parents. That's the leverage the parents have. Every citizen needs their government. That's the leverage the government has. And every therapeutic patient needs their therapist. If there's no vulnerability and trust to need, you don't get any therapeutic work done. If you open up and be vulnerable, then there are parts of you that desperately need acceptance and do not need rejection and betrayal. And if your therapist will betray you, reject you, and get mad at you for doing the right thing because it steps on one of their addictive frameworks, you're in the same dynamic of a child with a parent that you need and who will not give out the, whatever it is, some sense of security and belonging, unless you collude with the abuse. Now the community betrays itself, betrays Peter, betrays the board, the facilitators, Dane, and the culture when I tell the community what's going on and its response is silence and apathy. If I bring this to the courts, for example, I've approached the district of Marin, the district attorney of Marin. She doesn't want to be on film. Not a good sign, is it? So if I go to the courts, and the courts are happy to help as long as it doesn't come out, because, we have to understand that this is a fractal pattern that repeats itself in every level of our culture. Every level of our culture is built up of individuals like you and I who have these two sides, these addictive coping, unconscious pain management, and profoundly destructive coping mechanisms, and this healthy part that wants to grow. And the point of a therapist or a school is to help you first differentiate the two and then to support you in finding the strength to love yourself authentically, which are to do things that increase your physical survival, your sense of security, your love and belonging, your self-esteem. Become the person you want to be, which is not, I don't want to be a secret keeper. That's never been my aspiration since seeing that in my household. Well, Peter gave me the secret. Here, we can be buds. We both have our little secret from my wife. Well, do I want a bud or do I want a healthy human being? I'm not going to get a healthy human being if I confront an addict in this state, as was evidenced when I went to the facilitators. One of the first things Peter told me as a further betrayal and confirmation of where he was coming from was that he would never trust me again for the rest of his life, meaning that his sociopathic addict that can turn on his wife in a heartbeat thought he could count on me. And when I told the truth to the colleagues who had trained, chosen Peter, and recommended him, when I told the truth to them so that they could help Peter become an adult, become a safer person, do what's best for his career. Peter identifies with the surviving coping mechanism, and that part has been betrayed. When you have a split personality, you betray one or the other. Whoever you cast your loyalty with, you betray the other part of that individual. I cannot go along with these waves of continual escalating abuse without betraying everything decent within Peter Sandhill. But if Peter identifies with the cool guy who doesn't do anything wrong, and he maintains that identity with secrets and hiding anything that he does that is bizarre, crazy, and dysfunctional, then I'm ruining his delusion. I'm betraying him to the truth that he doesn't want to deal with, because that truth brings up pain. Pain that Peter has not received support within this community or apparently anywhere else to deal with. Well, Peter's got his defenses up very good. He has multiple relationships. He's very charming. He's very funny. He's very pleasant. He's very confident. And those are attractive qualities in our culture. So he leverages those qualities to be spread way too thin. He does not show up fully for himself or anyone else, period. But he'll have 10, 20 people all vying for his attention. This is a defense. So when anyone challenges Peter Sandhill on his shit, his first protocol is to withdraw. What is he withdrawing? Charm, praise, softness, presence. He's withdrawing something that everyone wants in this culture. And the message is, you push me on my shit, you're not getting anything. Well, that works. He doesn't give Sarah as much as she wants. He doesn't give me as much as I want. He doesn't give Hi as much as Hi wants. He doesn't give any of his lovers. He doesn't give his child as much as that child wants, needs, and deserves. And the deal is that he turns hostile in tone and withdraws at the same time, teaching you what's okay to talk about and what isn't. Here's one of, and then his next violation, etc., is, I tell him he has blind spots because I can see fuzz all around his eyes. That's the gift of a psychedelic session. So this is the joke. He induces an overdose. I start seeing things that the part of me that will not challenge Peter normally refuses to see out of my loyalty to the abuse contract with Peter. So I start seeing it. And in the innocence of the psychedelic state, I just say whatever I see. He fights me tooth and nail. No, I don't have blind spots. I know that thing you're seeing. I know how I look. I don't have any blind spots. There's nothing I'm not seeing. Where do you go from that? The only person on the planet who doesn't have blind spots. And he knows it without even hearing what they are. I go along with that. I don't want a fight with my therapist when I was high. That's a disastrous thing to realize when in a dissociative overdose state, is that your therapist is more fucked up than you are, and you're that you're in their care. This is why children invariably take their parents' dysfunctions and faults, internalize them, and say, I'm unlovable because I have a sociopathic parent that can't love me. I'm unlovable. Because I have a sociopathic parent who can't nourish me, I'm unvaluable. Because I don't get any attention unless I'm dysfunctional or manipulative, I have no value. I'm dysfunctional. I'm unlovable. I have no value. And my dad, he's perfect. Mom, he's perfect. And if you play along that, they like looking perfect, so you get your little kudos. It's terrifying to be in a dependent state, which one is with one's therapist, because one's going back into that regression, etc. It's terrifying to wake up and realize this person I'm depending on doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. And so, must be something wrong with me. I remember the thought when Peter told me about not telling Sarah. I thought, that's interesting. I said, maybe he's right. I can remember countless girlfriends who got mad at me for telling them the truth. I have to admit, it seems like a number of them would have been very happy if I'd lied to them. And in fact, I love the Thai culture because in some ways it's so honest compared to, American cultures in some ways. And, I'm meeting a girl on a first date. I feel strong lust, lovely presence, enjoying the games, ping pong, etc. And I say, what's your availability? And she says, half a day on Sunday every week. And I say, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, daily interaction. I'd love that to be you. But I'm not going to stop searching when I've got a half a day commitment a week. And she said, I said, so I cannot say that I'm not going to meet and or be sexual and explore relationships with other people if you've got a half day. I would love to spend a half day with you, but the reality is that I'm going to be seeing other people. And she said, well, if you lie to me and tell me that I'm the only one and that I'm special and and see other people, I expect that's what guys do. But you can't tell me. You've got to tell me that I'm the one and only and blah, 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 blah. And I said, I can't do that. I'm not going to lie to you. Because that damages my self-esteem. I believe in truthfulness and transparency. So I turned away this wonderful, energy and experience, etc., because I wasn't willing to lie to her. Nor was I willing to lie to myself that was okay. It does not make sense to me in my observation or experience or my conscience that that's the solution. Now, if she'd said, I'd love to spend more time with you, but, I've got this job and this and that and the other, but, could we spend some time, and if it looks rich enough, let's work together to transform my life so we have more time. I'd have done that in a heartbeat. But she wasn't that interested. And I'm not going to lie to her. And you see, the thing is, when you betray someone else, you betray yourself at the same time. And so so that was clear as day for me, but I wasn't high at the time. I've never lied to a lover. I've never cheated on a lover. And I will get rid of lovers that insist on lies of omission by not making enough time to get caught up. The lover that wants to say, oh, we're soulmates. I'll see you 2 hours a week. I won't ask you about anything in your life. I won't tell you anything that's all going on in mine. I won't make any time to see each other. But let's just assume that we're soulmates, whatever that means, and that what you're assuming is what I'm assuming, and I know I can trust you. Let's do it. I say no. There's not enough time for you to see me clearly. I couldn't tell you the truth about all that's going on in my life if I tried, because I can't fit it into 2 hours and do anything else. So, no. I want someone with time. Well, Sarah wants more time with Peter than the hour a day she says she gets with him. That's reasonable. That's rational. I've never been able to have a transparent relationship with less than 4 hours a day. There just isn't the time to share all the feelings that affect the other person, all what's going on, my thoughts, my plans, what's shifting, etc. There's just not time. And so there's the betrayal in much of the polyamorous field, where it's all about sexual diversity at the cost of emotional intimacy. That's a defense which Peter pulled on me. Immediately I began to challenge him because things started going wrong after this experience, beginning with him being late for the first session. That's his next violation. It's his violation to the community, to me, facilitators, and board. How safe do you feel with a therapist who pushes you into an overdose, escalates a sexual relationship while high, and then says he's pushing you into the overdose because he promises to be there no matter what, but he doesn't bother to find out that you have early childhood attachment disorder, which means it's very vulnerable, when in a new relationship. He doesn't bother to study the data, or maybe he doesn't care, that 99% of all therapeutic relationships that go romantic turn out badly for the participant, which is a violation of the community, which is a violation of the people who are trusting him to do a good enough job to be worth recommending. He's reflecting on High's ethics because High chose him, High trained him, and High unequivocally recommended him without disclosing he had no license, without disclosing the extent of his training, and without disclosing what he could and could not competently do, and without asking for any feedback, so that the first wave of abuse 10 years ago never got dealt with. High is violating me, the community, and its board of directors, who are asked to be held accountable for their behavior. And they're violating Peter. They're not holding him accountable to his healthy self. So, as every addict does in an enabling environment, they default into their blind spots and addictions. That's what we do when we've been traumatized and shamed into an abuse contract with parents who were not allowed to question, and where that doesn't get dealt with. But that does not get dealt with High's therapists. Working with Barbara Musser, Sarah Sandhill, Peter Sandhill, and Ann Watts, abuse contracts do not get sorted out. You will never in a High workshop be told to segment out your coping mechanism when you go into a regressed childlike state where you need love and it feels insecure. What do you do to secure love in an unhealthy way? Do you please? Do you say yes when you mean? What do you do there? And how do you help your partner have a safe emotional conversation with you prior to sex so that they don't inadvertently participate in an invitation to be abused? And there's a very interesting dynamic in the split of the self that goes on around all of this. The dynamic is that people with abuse contracts of pleasing, etc., will invite you to abuse them. I've had 30 lover relationships within the High community. And at least 5, and quite possibly a lot more, but very obviously so 5 of those women actively courted abuse. Oh, it's fine if you can't stand me, or it's fine if you cheat on me. It's fine. Just don't leave me. And I didn't want anything to do with being invited into being abused, because it's very difficult to treat someone better than they treat themselves and be in a romantic relationship. It takes a discipline, because they're constantly punishing you if you talk well of them, and they're constantly enabling you if you abuse them. Because that's the child's learning of how they secure love in a dysfunctional family. You allow the abuse, and you pamper the abuser. This, unless you are psychologically literate, and you observe this, 1, and 2, unless you care enough about yourself to not want to be that person, and 3, unless you care more about the person than they care about themselves. Free sex, whatever, fine. You want to be abused, whatever I want to think about, I'll just fuck you whenever I want to, and treat you like shit. And the abuse enabler will say, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't trouble yourself. I know I'm not very important. I know I'm not valuable, blah, 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 blah. And you say, fine, you're not valuable, you're not important, I'll treat you like shit. Now, one part, the enabler, does this. The healthy part of the self is enraged and will develop a sense of hatred because because there's no support for the healthy self. There's too much trauma underlying the switch towards the healthy side within the individual, so they hate themselves for betraying themselves. Once they hate themselves, they hate you for going along with it. And they will try to drag you down to their level out of rage at being treated like garbage. I had one high team member who would say to me, I just let men do whatever they want with my body. You want to fuck me without a condom, no safe sex conversation, whatever. I'm cool with it. I do whatever you want to do. And that didn't sit right. And I liked her. I still do. Lovely body. What could be more satisfying to the chauvinistic, egotistical male ego in the United States? But I knew it would hurt me because I don't separate emotions. And that kind of indiscriminate moving around, if I formed an attachment, would feel very painful to me. So I said no, and I said no, and I said no. For several years I said no. And then in many visits I said no. And this is where the high you are at choice and ask for your 100% is misleading. I was about to go to Thailand, and I knew that I would be seeing a lover over there. And so I knew it wouldn't hurt me, whatever she did, after our sexual encounter. It would hurt me immensely if I was missing her and wanting more and all that, but it wouldn't hurt me if I was, off there. And I had no sexual agreements with anyone at that time, and so I was not violating any sexual agreement. I was not lying to anyone. I would not lie to anyone, and she was constantly trying to seduce me, and saying, "Wouldn't it be nice?" or this. So I had sex with her on the last day before going to Thailand. And I thought nothing of it because I knew I could take care of my own feelings. I also knew from her stories that she's been doing this for years with just about anyone, and that she liked it and it was fine with her. I knew I wouldn't like it. It wouldn't be fine with me. It seemed very doubtful that all of her was fine with it, but she's at choice, right? I've asked permission. She's said yes, despite her saying, I used a condom, da-da-da. She became passively aggressive towards me from that moment. And that hurt me because I'd seen a pretty trustworthy person, because I had honored her best side. What she was inviting me and everyone else to do was bad for some part of her. She was dishonoring that part. As many sexual abuse survivors do, they learn that their only value is being used for sex, and so they want to feel valuable, and so they try and get used for lots of sex. That is deeply and profoundly insulting to the deep sense of her value and dignity. And that part, who had been my friend, because I had said no to her repeated invitation to abuse, that's in a sense how she was testing if I was a safe person, if I was safer than she was and safer than other guys. And I think that her healthy side liked me because I said no, because I showed interest in her feelings, because I told her, "You're very attractive, but I would feel hurt And I was telling her the truth. I was telling her about my feelings. I was telling her why. I had nothing but goodwill for her. But I had a blind spot, created in part by this focus on asking for permission and 100% and all that. Missing from that is these abuse contracts. I experienced this with another woman at High as well, where I asked to enter her. I immediately felt her lift her body. She said, sure, great. I entered her. She left her body. I said, where have you gone? You're not here anymore. This was within 5 seconds of entering her. She said, well, this feels a little odd, uncomfortable, and I don't really want this, but I'm doing this to please you. She had said yes. I had asked. There's consent. That doesn't mean there isn't abuse. I hadn't bothered to get to know her childhood. I hadn't bothered to get to know how she found value with men. I hadn't learned anything about her because High doesn't have a protocol for a safe emotional conversation prior to sex. High, like so much of our culture, is focused on the physical act. And as a materialist, if you have disclosure about the diseases, if you have the safe sex conversation, then it's fine. Nothing else matters. What about the psyche? What about that wounded child that's feeling unvaluable? What about the child that will lie and tell you the exact opposite of their true feelings because they believe that if they tell the truth, they'll be hated because they were hated as a child anytime they pointed out the truth of their parents' abuse? What about that? Well, High violates me, Peter, itself, the board, and the community by not teaching that technology. So I'm dealing with women who don't know that after doing dozens of High workshops. And I'm dealing with myself who doesn't know that after 100 High events. Why isn't that taught? That is a betrayal. In the same way that selling a car without functioning brakes or revealing that, selling a protocol without the appropriate filters to honor the psyche, when there's this amount of cross-wiring and abuse and trauma, etc., is irresponsible. Meaning it's not ethical. It doesn't lead to consistent win-win. It leads to saying, can I do this? People saying yes, and it ruining the relationship. Why? Because the person who asked didn't take the time to learn blah, 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 and the person who said yes didn't know they had an abuse contract and is more focused on their insecurity than on their truth. We raise people like that, so we're going to encounter them. If we encounter them, how do we honor someone who doesn't know how to honor themselves? For that, you need data about what's actually going on. Well, that's what you go to a school to learn. So High doesn't provide that data. So we're dealing with two ignorant people. And of course, it stems from the facilitator level intelligence. Peter never asked a goddamn thing about me. He knew that this was the right thing to do because it fit into his schedule. That's his filter, Linda Sassara teaches him that if it flows and is easy, then it's meant to be, And so I asked him to facilitate the psychedelic session. It fit into his schedule. So he said, I know this is good because it fit into my schedule. And that's what I'm learning with Linda Sassara. Well, Linda Sassara, of course, who is not doing an adequate job to differentiate things fitting into an addictive cycle easily. It's so easy. I just wanted a beer and I drank another one and then another one just flowed right in there. It was so wonderful. I knew I was meant to be drunk and get fired because it happened so easily. Linda doesn't do her job to teach that point, nor does she do her job to respond to feedback about that. Her student and High's student betrayed me with inadequate training. Because of my inadequate training, I betrayed them. Every one of these betrayals goes both ways. Every single time I let Peter get away with this shit, his healthy self hurts. And he doesn't know it because he can't tell the difference. And he can't tell the difference because High training does not differentiate the healthy shadow. In the room of love, You want to have sex, it's all good. It's all good. More sex, more cuddles, all the room of love. There's all kinds of dysfunction beneath the surface, but it's not being differentiated between there's all kinds of healthy love and positive stuff beneath the surface as well. You've got to be able to know which persona is saying what for what purpose. If you cannot do that, and if your partner cannot do that, you will go in and out of abuse without knowing the difference. And the relationship will end when you cause so much abuse. Like, how did my relationship with this high assistant end? Well, I had sex with her, and she missed our next appointment, and she didn't communicate. And then she missed the next appointment. Then she broke this agreement. And then she blamed me for breaking the agreement. That's how a self that is hurt but doesn't understand how it's been hurt and can't articulate how it's being hurt to make it right directly expresses and mirrors the hurt back. I was no longer the safe friend because I took her at her word and I didn't know the difference. I betrayed her, and in doing so betrayed myself and damaged the relationship. And she invited me to, repeatedly. Sexual abuse survivors are among the most seductive and manipulative people on the planet, offering ego, offering pleasure, offering addiction, offering adrenaline, which are all drugs in high demand in a pain-based culture. And as soon as you accept them, you've hurt their essential self, and they will hate you. And they will hate themselves. And so they will express it in a very they will usually express it like one high assistant, another one. I was very attracted to her, and she said that what I like doing is seducing men, having sex with them, dangerous sex with them, and then I hurt them emotionally. And I said, well, I don't want to be hurt emotionally. And she said, well, you shouldn't court me then sexually, because that's what I do. I was abused by this and this and this. She's a high assistant. Now, because I didn't go for the sex, because I cared about myself, I said, no, thank you. You could have the hottest body around. I'm here to learn about love, not sexual abuse. Well, she's got zero support within her high training. You see, and if I stay silent, I betray the community, I betray the board, I betray Peter, I betray the facilitators, I betray the team. These are team members who haven't received adequate psychological awareness within their school. Because the facilitators and the board and the culture and their parents and their teachers have all betrayed them. And they're getting kind of negative feedback, validation, attention, etc., for going through this abuse cycle. And they're not being honored for who they are. So I just want to get, the point with this is simply to illustrate that if you let someone betray you, you're betraying everyone else. If you betray someone else, whether they invite you to or not, you're betraying yourself and everyone else. There's only one way off this game board in which everyone wins, and that's to learn the habits of ethics. The habits that lead to trust and trustworthiness, creating maximum value, etc. And there's only one way you can make the transition from the unhealthy, adaptive self to the healthy self. And that's first of all acknowledging that there's an addiction and there's a lot of pain that's being managed by that addiction. Secondly, acknowledging that it is our responsibility as culture, and in the negation of that responsibility as individuals, to develop psychological literacy, emotional literacy. I completely understand now the passive-aggressive hostility of the innocence in the team member that I said yes to. As an emotionally and psychologically literate adult, I should have known better, but I didn't. I didn't know better after 100 high events. Many people do not know better after 100 high events. High escalates sexuality 500% for better or for worse, as a general statistic. I'd had 3 lovers in 26 years. No, in 28 years. In 28 years, I'd had 3 lovers. Only one of them being a relationship. By age 38, I'd had 30 lovers within the high community. 3 of them within the first month of joining high, all of them abusive. Every one of those first 3 relationships was abusive. And I didn't know the difference. My first session work with Peter Sandhill was abusive. He didn't ask about my feelings about homosexuality in a culture that terrorized many feminine men and homosexuals. He didn't ask about my feeling of breaking the law. You're not supposed to have sex with your therapist. He didn't ask my feeling about being a secret keeper. He was breaking his high agreements by telling me, within 5 minutes, he's got an erection. I'm trying to figure out what to do with this in his house that I'm coming to for therapy. High didn't teach me how to train. What do you do when your therapist has an erection when you walk in the door and says they're attracted to you? I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. Is it good? Is it bad? Should I be complimented? I don't know. And that's the problem. It's very difficult to take care of oneself and be in ethical integrity with ourselves. So I paid money to get confused and to get hurt and to be muddled about what love meant, and then I exited Peter Sandhill. And that confusion affected every one of my high relationships because they were a relationship with a somewhat confused male. Because that confusion never got cleared up. Because when I went on to Anne and Barbara Musser after that, they never asked what happened with Peter. Why not? You recommended him, you trained him, why don't you want to know how he's doing? Why am I coming to you? Never came up. It's blindness upon blindness upon blindness, leading to violation upon violation upon violation. And pretty soon the only thing holding that dysfunctional web together is secrets, covering each other's backs. I'll scratch your back. If you scratch back, I won't tell what you did bad. If you don't tell this, we'll all pretend that this is all love and everything, and no one will deal with what's going on here. So this is how you destroy the integrity of a group of people. Secrets, betrayals, lack of intimacy, lack of psychological knowledge, pushing people beyond boundaries, accepting abuse invitation if they're verbally made. See, that's what I learned at High. You have to get verbal permission. Everyone's at choice. Well, everyone is at choice to develop strongly dysfunctional abuse contracts when their healthy choices were violated as children. We need to address this. Anyone who wants to deal with ethics in our culture has to address this. Anyone who is interested in win-win relationships based on ethics that work, anyone who is committed to High's mission statement, whatever they change it to be, has got to address this. Because no mission statement can honestly say, our mission is to have as much sex as possible in whatever way imaginable and cover our tracks if we sexually abuse people, and then knock them off the list so they can't tell anyone. And that's our mission. Well, if the mission is win-win and what we're doing is the opposite of win-win, you've got schizophrenia within the school you're trying to learn from. That doesn't work. That results in pain. That results in betrayal. The solutions are obvious. full transparency. Every facilitator and board member should write about how they got into this mess and what they've learned. Are they capable of doing the roles? Better independent board oversight and more additional training. That's the only way to deal with this. Addiction is very hard to break. An addiction to looking good in a healer or a therapist is deadly, because it means that every time you make a mistake, which is already inherent in coming into the relationship with an addiction, you're going to blame your client because you can't afford to look like a shit in your own eyes. So you're going to try and convince your client that you're wonderful and that everything's wrong with you, which is exactly what Peter did on both occasions. He's never going to trust me for the rest of his life. Who isn't? Who cares? Peter's addict is not trustworthy to begin with, or you don't violate every single person in the circle to fulfill your stupidity. It's that simple. That is not a trustworthy part. It shouldn't trust people. That means you're healthy. If that part in Peter doesn't trust you, you're on the right track. But first you've got to grasp the fact that these individuals who have been saying that they're committed to healing ignorance and fear and creating a world where everyone wins and dignity doesn't mean anything when you head into these blind spots, when you deal with a malpractice issue. It means shit. You got to grasp that. These people are able to spout this in every one of my workshops and then do the exact opposite. Have fear, have ignorance, have shame, but blame the victim, refuse to apologize, refuse to acknowledge. They don't know anything in their blind spots in this terrain. Well, everything you learn from a teacher, from a parent, etc., in a vertical relationship where you're regressed, which you've got to be in order to do the deep work, you're going to take your cue from the masculine presence in the room, which is the authority figure. And we cannot have authority figures in denial, abusing themselves, each other, and therefore their community, and have that relabeled as love. Or we have nothing better than the family abuse system with a lot more sex, which means a lot more vulnerability, which means a lot more violation, which is exactly what brought me into a suicidal state after 30 failed high relationships, where that went on the majority of the time, and I lacked the distinction to have confidence that I could do anything different the next time, because every time I did it right, according to High, every time I asked permission, every time I had a safe sex conversation, every time I never lied, every time I honored boundaries. Why wasn't it working? Well, the message of silence, when there's this much dysfunction in the protocol, is that there's something wrong with you. And that's exactly the message that every parent passes on to their child when they abuse the child systematically in a state of willful or helpless negligence and ignorance, and say that they're great parents, and that this is love, and this is love, and this is love. The child understands that they're fatally flawed because it's too scary to say there's anything wrong with the parent. And so they must be unlovable. And if they're unlovable, they've got to sign an abuse contract or a bribe contract or something. It isn't going to be love, but if I pretend to be this person or say yes to what's unhealthy for me, then I'll be lovable because I'm not lovable for myself. And this is the deepest wound that I received from Peter Sandhill and the high facilitators, is that the part of me that cares enough to come forward is shameful, a secret, unlovable, and unwanted by the entire community and facilitators and board. But that's the part in me that I've worked my ass off to cultivate after watching what lies and deceptions and crap did to my parents. I learned not to have a healthy relationship with my parents. I just analyzed their patterns, and like my mother would lie, and that always did a lot of damage, so I never lied. My father would not receive love or express any feelings, so I went the other way and moved into my sensitivity. My parents taught me by opposites, and then sadly, when I developed my marriage. What I did was I inverted a lot of what I had learned at high, and most of what Peter was doing and the facilitators were doing, and I was able to create, my first sustainable, loving relationship by doing the opposite, which is simply to focus on being loving, making sure that everything that went on in the relationship supported my partner in her survival, her security, her sense of love and belonging, her self-esteem, developing her gifts, bringing those gifts into the world, helping people appreciate the magnificence of who she is, helping her transcend her culture and the abuse identity to be the magnificent woman she is. I'm so lucky to be in relationship with her. I didn't ask for my 100% because my 100% was uneducated and didn't include a good protocol for healing trauma, which she had, and sexual abuse, which she had. But this protocol does. And, in diving deeply into the literature, which is the only ethical thing to do when we're this psychologically illiterate, the more we absorb data and respond with empathy, the more we are transparent about what we do and do not know. And very, very importantly, because the facilitators wouldn't apologize, and that caused 40% of the damage, because then all of my therapists and my school and my organization is taking a stand that the deepest pain of my life is not worth acknowledging because they don't want to feel their impact, which means that I have no value to them. My deepest feelings have zero value to them because they don't want to understand. I asked to be listened to and to be held. They had a meeting behind my back. That's a violation, enabling another violation with Peter. Peter was starting to come around before that meeting, but when he understood that all his cronies would collude to shush it up, he became more belligerent and hostile towards me in a session facilitated by Felicia out of the goodness of her heart as a couples therapy. You don't facilitate couples therapy with an emotionally illiterate, dysfunctional therapist who doesn't know what they're doing and who has taken money to sexually abuse someone under the influence of psychedelics. That's not a couple's dynamic. You don't charge your wife to spend time with you and say you know the right thing to do and all that. So Felicia didn't know what she was doing. So Felicia violated her relationship with Peter by refusing to hold him accountable. It was right for Peter to hate me and blame me for his life falling apart and express all that to a grieving and dysfunctional regressed child who still hadn't integrated their psychedelic session, because Peter ran away. As soon as I started telling the truth, Peter didn't want anything, so he blockaded all communication, other than his recommendation that I marry a woman that led directly to abuse, because he refused to acknowledge that there was profound incompatibility, and he kept pushing and pushing and pushing with his psychic powers, saying that this was the woman I should marry for my optimal future. Another abuse, but it's an abuse of everyone. It's abuse of himself, his psychic powers, abuse of me, abuse of the woman, abuse of his community. It's an abuse all around. And every single one of us who allows this abuse, it's like a virus. It's an addictive protocol, a pattern. And it's been managing a lot of pain. Pain that our culture causes and refuses to heal. Peter's in a lot of pain. The facilitators are in a lot of pain. I am in a lot of pain. If you're present to this, you're in a lot of pain, because this is our pain. This is our culture that behaves this way. And the next generation will be subject to the same wave of abuse unless this wave, this generation, develops the emotional maturity to to face trauma, to face death. It is a death of the self in many ways. It's a death of the child to a certain extent, to wake up out of the abuse contract and realize, no, that wasn't love, that wasn't love, that wasn't love. That was abuse, that was abuse, that was abuse. And no, my government doesn't take care of me, nor can I count on my spouse to. We have a very precarious situation that's healthy and unhealthy, and if it's strongly addictive, the addict always wins unless it receives adequate support. But I asked the entire community for adequate support, and it was withheld. So we're not going to help our addicts in this community out of their addictive cycle, which means they're not going to free from the addiction, which means their best coping strategy for safety and survival is to hide it, which means shaming and burying the abuse survivors, who have usually experienced that and gotten used to it in childhood, which ensures that we are in a relationship in which no one has a high probability of winning. Until these things are grasped with, dealt with, there are support circles that deal with emotional, sexual, and narcissistic addiction. If you can't be wrong, you've got a narcissistic addiction. There's a deep terror underneath there. There's a 5-year-old boy who knows he's going to be hit if he makes a mistake. So he can't make a mistake because he can't tolerate the pain of being hit. If we don't grasp with the realities of our culture, we will kindly give the same pain and terror to the next wave of innocent children. If we do grasp with this and deal with it as spiritual adults, looking to the science, understanding that betraying the abuser is necessary to take a stand for the healthy self, if we grapple with that, we could actually provide something meaningful for the next generation to be born into. A generation in which they will not be threatened by, relatively speaking, 30-foot giants who can't face their own feelings. And so they're going to shove them down on an infant as the condition for some degree of survival and seeming belonging. That's way too big for an infant to bear. They will not bear it any more than we did. And they will collapse into a shame contract of, what do I have to do to not be killed in this house, not be hated? And that contract will undermine and destroy everything that's healthy in our culture until it is broken, which means it must be seen, hopefully by both parties, because, I can now see this and stop taking abuse from professionals, etc., and stop betraying them. But now I don't really need a professional, and my concern is for the people who still do need a professional, who by definition don't have the reserves to tell their professional, fuck you, this isn't right, I'm not going to let you go through this crap and ruin your life like this. Because to the therapeutic client, it ruins their session, it maybe ruins that relationship, but for the therapist, it ruins their whole career. It undermines everything their stated goal is to have, because their left hand is destroying everything good in their patient, and their right hand is working feverishly to try and help the other person within that framework. Pain is amplified and negativity is amplified because of the reptilian brainstem by 500%. So if you help someone one time and you betray someone one time as a therapist, the betrayal is going to land with 500% more impact, because that's how the brain's wired. It makes it a very difficult job, which makes training therapists so important. And we cannot ask, well, this is, what I do ask is not for perfection, but for honesty. I didn't stop abusing myself and everyone in my life once I understood this. But what I changed that made the big difference was I tracked it. I said, I can't help myself. I just have to criticize and blame you for everything, blah, 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 blah. Because I've received so much blame. 1. 2, I'm sorry. I wish I was in a place where I could stop that addictive behavior. 3, it's not your fault. It's my addiction, and it's my pain that has nothing to do with you. 4, I can listen to your feelings. How does it feel to be criticized for every little thing? I'm sorry. I get it. That's what my dad was like. I get it. I'm sorry that you have to deal with that. It's so painful for me, I can't even go back and deal with that wound. This was another, betrayal. But the much longer discussion on high ethics, is where I break down every little piece in much more detail. And it takes a long time because there are a lot of betrayals that affect everyone in the circle. But if you understand that every betrayal of me is a betrayal of the entire ethic, mission, community, and organization, if you grasp that, you move beyond the scapegoating dynamic. If you grasp that Peter is as much of a victim of his own ignorance and blind spot and of Hai's ignorance and blind spots, because Hai did just what Peter did. So I think Peter learned it from Hai. He had his own dysfunction, just being born a man in this time and period in a Western culture. Went on to Hai and took on their dysfunctions, and a lot of things don't get cleared up. That's a system that will keep creating dysfunctional facilitators until the system changes. So the most important question is, what variable could be introduced if the system is to be salvaged rather than, plowed under? Because one of the other has to happen. We can't have schools and therapists teaching abuse and calling it love. It's not, nobody wins. It's even worse than having a dysfunctional partner abuse you and call it love, because you say, well, you're a dysfunctional partner. When your therapist does it, it sinks in, it has 10 times the impact. So what is, and that's where I looked at the app technology, which forces transparency, which doesn't let a paranoid facilitator silence you for talking about their sexual abuse. That could do it. That could break the addictive thing. When an addict realizes it's going to come out one way or another, so I have to do the honorable thing, refund the money, do this, hire a trauma therapist. And if I'm going to all that expense and looking like a shit, maybe it's worth getting the proper training so that I don't repeat this mistake, and writing about it so that maybe people who have experienced this from other therapists are not taking on the therapist's inadequacy, which is one of my big angers, around all this, is the various times that I've felt small and dysfunctional because my therapist didn't know what they were doing and I didn't get better. And I thought, well, they know everything and seems to be working for other people. Why isn't it working for me? When you're working that hard and it's not working, that's one of the things that brings up the suicide. And so all of this is interconnected. A protocol that works leads to successful, loving relationships. Every single human being has a need for love and belonging. If we can't pull that off so that that core need is met, it's just level 3. Plenty of cultures have done that very, very well and much better than the United States. If we can't pull that off in any sustainable way, and the common criticism, that I've heard from people who drop out of High is, it's so great for the weekend, then it just falls apart and nobody wants to stay connected. There's no sustainable relating, going on. I just feel good and then feel lonely and abandoned. If we can't pull off sustainability with the ethics and the science that creates that, there's going to be incredibly lonely, miserable people who are vulnerable to falling into abuse contracts just to get some sense of meaning.